Okay, so I just started recording, so just so everyone knows, we are recording this for educational reasons. All right, so today, as you all know, we have a virtual guest. This is Nate Adams. Nate is a heat pump installer turned policy advocate, so sort of wearing both hats. I first became interested in Nate's work a number of years ago. I sort of learned about this idea of getting natural gas out of one's home, which is a journey I'm still on. But Nate has done a lot of videos that he posted online where he talked about times where he had helped customers switch from natural gas towards heat pumps and getting natural gas sort of out of the home. And so I'm very excited that he's here today. And so I will turn it over to you, Nate. Go ahead.
All right, let me go back to sharing here. Oh, where is it? This one, that's what I want. Yeah, thank you for having me, Dan. I appreciate it. And a couple little bits of background. So I pulled my first gas meter back in 2014. So it's now been a decade, and that's before electrification was cool. That oftentimes went back to my old business partner who saw electrification. He's a Spurgeon, and he's just like a click, 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 click. He's like, renewables are going to be the cheapest form of energy known to mankind ever. At some point in the near future. That near future is actually today. That's happened in the last couple of years. And so moving to electrification is super pragmatic. And then also it has significant climate ramifications as well. Because I mean, if you want to reduce or stop climate change, the biggest thing to do is to stop burning stuff.
Nate, can you try to speak up just a little bit?
What's that?
Can you speak up a little bit, please?
Oh, yes, yes. Let me see. Let me get it closer. Is that helping?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks.
Okay, okay. I can adjust levels if need be beyond this too. So anyway, I was an installation contractor for a while and learned how to deal with the building shell of houses. So that's insulation and air sealing. This picture that I have here on the screen, this is the second electrification I got to do my way. We did one with mini splits and I was never really happy with it. And actually it just converted to one of these about a year ago now. But this is a little 1,300 square foot house in Cleveland. And it was actually a prior client of mine. He called me and said, Nate, I want it to be comfortable and I want the operating costs to be reasonable. And so we insulated and air sealed it and put a heat pump in because it was so small that there actually, it was small, but also what it took to heat and cool it was less than what the smallest furnace on the market is. So that was an interesting sale. I just told him, Paul, don't tell me no. You can tell me no tomorrow. Don't tell me no right now. But I'm thinking about a heat pump. And he listened for a little bit. He's like, okay, Nate, let's do that. So this is the first one. And he was still renovating. This got a nice little patio when it was finished up. So anyway, just by way of intro, been doing this for 10 years. And it's known as Nate the House Whisperer because I do a mixture of all the things you need to do to make a house comfortable and healthy. And that is actually, to me, the best way to talk about heat pumps. Don't talk about it from a climate perspective in general, because that unfortunately ticks off about half the electorate now, for better or for worse. So anyway, that said, Dan, hop in and ask me questions and bounce back and forth as we go here. If anybody has any questions, just stop me because I wrote this to be like 30 minutes, planning on questions and engagement.
Yeah, I would say to the class, Nate can't see you, so just go ahead and interrupt. I'm sure no one will be offended if you have any questions or anything that you want to bring up.
Nope. Yeah, I don't want this to just be a flat out lecture where I talk to you. I like when there's engagement back and forth. So Dan, if you get a question, I'm sure there will be a hand that goes up and then interrupt me.
Sure.
So if you want to see some of the projects that I've done, I put this website together and frankly haven't touched it since 2017. But I did about 50 house whispering projects in the Cleveland area. They were not really deep retrofits, but substantial retrofits, with the exception of, well, this one was definitely a DER. A deep energy retrofit, I've seen it defined as a minimum of a 70% reduction in energy use versus where the house was before. Um, so there were a couple of those, but in general, that's not what I was trying to work on. But this is EnergySmartOhio.com if anybody wants to dive in. And then I also wrote this back in 2017, which is basically Building Science 101. And much of this is available for free download at natethehousewhisperer.com. And it just helps explain what the physics are that are working in a house. Because once you understand the why, it's a lot easier to figure out the what. And like with heat pumps, they don't have huge outputs, but I am surprised how many homes they're actually the appropriate piece of equipment for, because furnaces are just larger output wise than heat pumps are, and they're usually too large. So, Dan, I was bad, and I've actually broke a couple of my usual rules for slide decks. So this is called a slidegement. I normally try to follow the rule that if I can't write it in Sharpie on a Post-it note, I don't want to have that much wording on there. But Dan sent me this email with like, here's some things to do. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna talk about what's a heat pump, trade-offs of heat pumps and gas furnaces, upfront costs and operating costs. We'll talk a little bit about that. The policy proposal that I helped put together back in 21 and 22 to change all air conditioners to heat pumps. Um, and then we'll look at some running cost assumptions, and I'll show you a couple different ways. In general, though, for this, I just say that the costs are comparable. It's usually within a few $100s a year. Dan, actually, this math that you gave me, because your gas is so expensive, it actually came out pretty good, despite the fact that your juice is also kind of expensive too. National average is 15 cents, not 26. Okay, so I wanted to be start basic and then hopefully build up from there. Uh, so heat pumps, while on one hand, I hear arguments over they're badly named. On the other hand, as far as being named for what they do, it's dead on. They pump heat from one place to another, which sounds kind of strange, but you can do it. And I'm not going to dive into the magic of refrigeration, but that's how you do it. But you can pump heat from one place to another. So you are moving heat as opposed to making heat. And there's a big difference between them. Um, and an air conditioner is technically a one-way heat pump. In fact, so is a refrigerator, but a refrigerator is working the other way. Um, but an air conditioner can only go one way. And here we are, ACs and fridges. Now, a home heat pump, it actually goes two ways, so it can heat and cool. And technically, when your air conditioner is cooling the house, it's not actually cooling the house, it's taking heat from inside and ejecting it outside. What's that, Dan?
Nothing.
Okay. So the AC is not actually cooling, it's moving heat from one place to another. And then in the wintertime, it seems really strange, and I'll show this in a minute, but there's actually heat in the cold air that you can pull out of the cold air and eject it indoors. And that's more of what people think of with a heat pump. But making heat, it's actually pretty easy to think about. So this is toaster at my old house. And see how it glows red here? That is resistance heat. This is making heat. It's not moving heat. This uses a lot more energy to deliver heat to a space. So space heaters work the same way, and resistance backup on heat pump systems. So heat pumps have the heat pump part, the compressor part, like your air conditioner. But then a straight heat pump system usually has resistance backup as well, which is just like these coils, but where this is burning 700 watts, the coils burn between 5,000 and 20,000 watts. So they're this, only a lot bigger. And you can heat a house with this, but it's very expensive. So it's something that you don't necessarily have to get rid of it, but you want to reduce it as much as is reasonably possible. Now, moving heat, we had this cool old fridge. So I don't know if anybody saw the fourth Indiana Jones movie. It was garbage, but he got uh, blown up in a nuclear explosion inside one of these, and I thought it was hilarious. I'm like, that's our fridge. Uh, but if you think about a refrigerator, it's very cold in the freezer, so typically somewhere around 0 Fahrenheit. And then the fridge itself is usually just over freezing, so 35 or 40 degrees. Yet there's warm air coming out of the back of the fridge. So the fridge is actually taking heat out of 35-degree and 0-degree air and ejecting that into your house. Uh, so it's kind of strange to think of cold air containing heat, but it does. Now, different heat pumps are better at extracting it because, I mean, technically, uh, until you get to absolute zero, which is minus 459 Fahrenheit, if memory serves, there's still heat in the air, but you may or may not be able to actually extract it. You need specialized chemicals and refrigerants to be able to do that. But the refrigerants that we use for refrigerators and home heat pumps, they are good at running between, say, minus 20 or minus 30 Fahrenheit up to like 120 Fahrenheit. So the chemicals get chosen in large part for um, what their boiling points are. So, but I don't want to dive into the technical side of that too much. But regardless, there is heat in the cold air outside. Now, if you are making heat versus moving heat, uh, making heat uses between 2 and 5 times as much energy as moving heat. A friend of mine, Kevin Kircher, he's a professor at Purdue, I believe. He had a really funny way of putting this. He said a heat pump is like this little gnome that goes outside with a bucket and it piles heat into the bucket and then it runs back inside and dumps the bucket back out. And it just keeps doing this cycle. And he said it uses electricity to keep up its strength. I thought it was a funny little line. But because you are moving heat rather than making it, you can use much, much less energy. So, and when you see something that is 2 times efficient or 200% efficient, that is known as a 2 COP or coefficient of performance. So if you happen to see COPs talking about heat pumps, that's what they're looking at. And typically in colder climates over a season, you're going to run somewhere between a 2.5 and a 3 COP or 250 to 300% efficient. Um, and why that's important is typically electricity prices across the country are about triple the cost of gas. But because it's 300% efficient, it usually makes the operating costs come out pretty close to equal. So plus or minus 20 or 30%, and it's going to vary where you are. Uh, but that's why I like to say it's comparable to natural gas as far as running a heat pump. There's a lot of factors that it varies on, but comparable is a fair thing because I hear a lot of people trying to argue, well, it's way cheaper. Well, that may be true this year, but not next year because the rates change. Like when Russia was uh, cutting off the gas supply to Europe, and then the pipelines got bombed. That drove up natural gas prices worldwide quite a bit, and now we can actually export natural gas. That is a new capability of the United States, started in about 2016, really ramped up 18 or 19, if memory serves. So we are connected to world prices. So natural gas prices went up a whole lot that year, but electricity prices take a while to change. So it was the next year before all of that changed. Um, and so it made heat pumps look much cheaper that year. But then the next year, when the price assumptions were added with the more expensive gas, all of a sudden the electricity got more expensive and actually the gas got cheaper and it made the heat pumps look worse. So things are going to vary back and forth. So I always caution people to not speak in absolutes when it comes to operating costs because it's going to change and you have to run the math at the end of the day. And I will at the end of this presentation. Okay, important piece to know about air conditioners and heat pumps. So I'm going to move to the air conditioner to heat pump idea that I proposed. So a one-way air conditioner and a two-way heat pump or I'm actually starting to call them two-way air conditioners because now heat pump is getting politicized, which is problematic. Um, but when I was first talking about this, that's my friend Jigger Shaw, who now runs the Department of Energy Loan Program office. He's like, I can just hear it now. They're going to say they're going to try and take our air conditioners away. No, we're going to try and make your air conditioner be twice as useful as what it is. So if we call them a two-way air conditioner, I don't know that that can be politicized. So that is what I'm moving to. But that political comments aside, a one-way AC and a two-way heat pump, they are basically the exact same product. So if you picture two cars, like a Toyota Camry or something like that, and one has reverse gear and the other doesn't, but otherwise they're completely identical, that is how close the technology is between an air conditioner and a heat pump. Basically, every AC has an equivalent heat pump market or a heat pump model, and all of the manufacturers, the major HVAC manufacturers, make both air conditioners and heat pumps. So this is not unusual. And yeah, here we go. A heat pump can run backwards, which means it can heat as well as cool. And like I said, almost every AC has a heat pump version. So the biggest difference between them, I've got a picture on the next slide, but I literally keep this in my desk. This is a reversing valve. So the refrigerant is always going in the middle one, but it can come from either here or here. And this is what allows an air conditioner to become a heat pump. There's a few other parts, but without this, it doesn't work at all. This is the key piece. And this is not an expensive part. So the HVAC guy that I work with was kind enough to gift me this. And he said, I think this was 75 bucks. And that's on the shelf at a distributor. So it was already made somewhere in Asia, shipped all the way here. It went to the manufacturer, the main distributor, got shipped on to the local distributor here, marked up, and then sold to my HVAC guy, and it was like 75 bucks. So it gives you an idea. This is not a crazy expensive part, and that's the difference between them for the most part. There's about 150 bucks overall in parts difference between them. And so that is at the manufacturing level, it's about 150 bucks. So it's almost nothing, especially when you consider like the average house burns or creates between 2 and 4 tons of carbon per year. And for 150 bucks, we can reduce it by 2 to 4 tons, how much carbon that house has created, as long as it's using clean energy, which is the other side. But it's 2 to 4 tons for a 10 to 20 year period. So it ends up being, it's a lot. It's 20 to 80 tons that you're reducing for a heat pump that gets installed within its lifespan. And the cost of the factory is 150 bucks to do that. Like there's not a lot of levers that are just no brainers, but this is definitely one. And it's not well understood. Like I was surprised how few people understood this as I started to talk about it in 21. And then there's that picture of the reversing valve, because Zoom doesn't always look that great. But note it's made in China. All of these parts are generally made somewhere in Asia. Okay, another key thing, this is what I was throwing in as a slide right before we started here. So it's important to note that heat pumps lose capacity as it gets colder. So this was actually adapted from a chart where I put in a whole bunch of performance data from a bunch of different models. These are all 3-ton models, and I put in how much they output at various outdoor temperatures. So you can see it goes down to about 0. This top one here, this is a Daikin model, if memory serves. They're kind of fudging things. So if you look at the Japanese mini split versions, it will say that it's a 3-ton unit, but it's actually got like a 5-ton compressor in it. So they make the line look flat, but they're never flat. This is underneath, there's always a line here. Now, these ones that are all stacked on top of each other, this is a standard heat pump that is not a cold climate heat pump, if you will. The cold climate heat pumps use several different tricks to make it so that their output when it's colder is higher. They'll usually use more energy to do it, but that's okay because they're more than 100% efficient. So it's still better than resistance. But if you see how all these are stacked here, these are all standard 14 to 18 SEER heat pumps. So they're basically just off the shelf stuff. The mini split stuff tends to do better, but again, they're oftentimes gaming it by running a larger compressor. But when you are designing a system to heat the house at various temperatures, you want to do what you can to make sure that what it's outputting is close to what the house needs at that temperature. And then you can use electric resistance to make up the difference. So it's a booster. That's like an afterburner in a fighter jet. You don't use it all the time, but when you need something extra, you've got that button to push. So, but it's important to note, you'll hear that heat pumps lose capacity when it gets colder. That's true, but you can design around it, and that's where resistance is useful, resistance backup heat. Okay, two different kinds of systems. I'm just showing you actual pictures of systems that I sold and installed. So you can have one that's heat pump only, and you can have one that's hybrid. So this is in a 5,000 square foot-ish new house. This is actually a very small furnace. Well, it's 80,000. We spec to 60. But a 60,000 BTU output, that is the same as a 5-ton heat pump, which is the largest available one. So basically the smallest common furnace is also the largest common heat pump or air conditioner. But in the case of, this is a hybrid, which is a heat pump on top of the furnace. You can't fully tell up here, but this is actually the coil. The coil is basically just a radiator where the refrigerant comes in from outside, runs through the coil, and then it either ejects heat indoors or it pulls heat from indoors and ejects it outdoors. So depending which way it's going. But a hybrid is it's kind of an annoying compromise. On one hand, knowing what I know, that most homes don't actually need the furnace, but both consumers and contractors are terrified of moving straight to heat pumps and heat pump only systems. So realistically, this is the plan for the next 5 or 10 years. If we can get it to where the piece on top is not a one-way air conditioner, but a two-way heat pump, this is the furnace down here. And furnaces are pretty easy to tell. See these pipes coming out of it? If it's plastic, so these are the flue. Well, one is the intake, the other is the flue going out. If it's plastic, that means it's 90% or more efficient. If it's metal, it's somewhere between 80 and 85% efficient, is how they work. But anyway, this is a hybrid, so there's a furnace plus a heat pump. And then over here, this whole system, so note the boxes are really, really similar. So if you aren't educated or aware, visually it's really tough to tell these apart. The key thing is you look for the flues. Is there a place for the combustion gases to go? This was the first Carrier green speed that I did. I regret a few things in here, like not making this filter larger and this drop larger, which is small install preference differences. But the thing to note is the indoor unit basically looks the same. And the outdoor unit, if you remember at the beginning, it's this great big box. That's the Carrier green speed, which this has the same, this is the same product here. The outdoor units basically look just like an air conditioner, but you have to put them on legs because the outdoor unit actually freezes up and turns into a little block of ice. So you periodically have to defrost it, which melts the ice in the unit, and then it runs out as water down the center. So if you put them on the ground, you end up with just letting the thing sit in ice, and then things break. So the main difference between an air conditioner and a heat pump when you look at the outside unit is the heat pump's going to be on legs, typically between 4 and 12 inches above the ground. And actually here I'll just run back. So probably a little bit on the small side, but see how this has legs here? These legs are about 1 foot tall. This thing is enormous. It's like 3.5 foot by 3.5 foot by over 4 feet tall. So I'm not crazy tall. I'm 5'8", and I can just barely look down to the top of this thing. This is an enormous unit. I joke with clients that this is the droid that they're looking for. If anybody is I don't know. Does everybody watch Star Wars still? Okay, this is kind of a key thing that I'm winding up to by looking at these. So what I think about for the most part is what systems are capable of using electricity to heat the house. So a heat pump only system is only using electricity. So obviously that is heating with electricity. And a hybrid system or dual fuel, where it's a furnace plus a heat pump, this can also heat with electricity. And while this sounds like kind of a nasty compromise, there was a great little study out of Toronto, which I need to dig up. I've asked some friends for it and haven't found it, but I remember there was a good sized house in Toronto, about 3,000 square feet, and it was older. It was built in the 60s and it was very leaky. And they put a basic single stage heat pump in the house along with a furnace. And that heat pump reduced the natural gas usage of that house by 55%. So basically, really cold climate, like worst case, really cold climate, big house, leaky house, crummiest heat pump that you could put in, and it still reduced gas usage by 55%. Um, that to me, if there's any way to get that 150 bucks of parts put on every system, that's a huge win. Where in the north, what you normally see is you get a furnace plus an air conditioner. This can't heat with electricity. You need that reversing valve to be able to do this. And that might be a little bit too much to show, but the idea of what I put out there policy wise was, why don't we pay the manufacturers to stop making air conditioners and only make heat pumps? And I mean, in another country, you could probably do this with a mandate, but realistically, that is never going to happen in the United States, not in the current political climate. Um, so I came up with this idea to be very Republican friendly. And for the record, I lean a little bit right myself, which is unusual in the climate space. Uh, but I suggested that we pay the manufacturers to stop making air conditioners and pay them about $400 a unit, which covers that 150 bucks. Um, Plus, for the first couple of years that they do this, there's going to be all kinds of crazy warranty things. People are going to screw up the installs left or right, and they're going to blame the manufacturer for those errors, but it's not actually the manufacturer, it's the installs. Um, so I put that idea into a thread. I think it was February of 21. And by June, well, I had a couple of people reach out just immediately, and we turned it into a paper, which is called the Hybrid Heat Homes paper, done by CLASP. And this is one of the diagrams that came out of that. But that paper basically ran the numbers on what I was suggesting, and the numbers came out really good. So it's about 10 billion to change every air conditioner to a heat pump for 4 years, which is less than what the IRA heat pump programs cost. And those are projected to have a measly 2% increase in heat pump penetration. And what I'm suggesting is a 100% increase in, actually, it's technically more than that, because one thing I didn't put in here is the number of air conditioners versus heat pumps. But round numbers, we sell about 4 million heat pumps per year in the US and 6 million air conditioners. So we sell about 1.5 times as many ACs, one-way ACs, as we do two-way heat pumps. So if we could make all of those 6 million air conditioners into heat pumps, it has a really substantial effect to climate, and also makes houses more comfortable if it's done halfway decently. So this is showing a hybrid system. So in cooling mode, all you're doing is running electric, because the furnace can only make heat. It's not going to cool. But in the wintertime, the heat pump is providing most of the heating here, and then it will add backup heat when it gets too cold for the heat pump to be able to do, because I showed how the output of heat pumps drops as it gets colder. You can kick the furnace in when the heat pump can't do the job on its own anymore. Now, to be clear, you can pretty easily make it so the heat pump can do the job. It's not that hard. But this is something that contractors are relatively familiar with and not terrified of. And particularly in cold climates, man, I am just shocked how few HVAC contractors are even open to the idea of heat pumps. They just think it's dumb. Okay, now a fully electric home. So this is also out of the 3H paper, the hybrid heat homes paper. If it's fully electric, so and that's the one on the left that I showed you earlier. It's the box, but it doesn't have the flues coming out of it. It in cooling mode, obviously, it's just cooling with the air conditioner, or it's the heat pump technically. And then in the wintertime, you have the heat pump to do it. One thing that didn't get added in here is you can use resistance backup for when either the compressor breaks, which someday it will, and then also if the heat pump can't make enough heat to keep it warm, which can happen. So just to repeat, heat pumps heat with electricity, and hybrids are capable of heating with electricity. Now, one other thing I should mention on hybrids. So if you put a hybrid in a warmer climate, so I'll have a picture on the last slide of my buddy Stephen Reardon. He is in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, and he put a hybrid in his house about 10 years ago. And I think he's purposely kicked it on one other time, but the only time for years that his furnace ran ever was when he installed the system and tested to make sure the furnace worked. That's it. So he got a 100% reduction in gas use for heating in his house, which is easy to do in the milder climates. Now, with my clients, when I was tightening the homes, I was seeing between an 80 and a 90% reduction in natural gas use using a hybrid. So, and here's back to what I was talking about. So 10 billion can turn every AC into a heat pump for 4 years. There's a joke with just about everything. Good, fast, or cheap, pick two. This is one of the very, very few ideas that I have seen out there that's good, fast, and cheap. This achieves 100% heat pump penetration almost instantly, like within 12 to 18 months, maybe 24 of being passed. And it works out to be ballpark $10 a ton carbon dioxide. So pretty amazingly cheap. And so that was in the Hybrid Heat Homes paper in 2021. Turned into the Heater Act, which Senator Klobuchar introduced. It didn't unfortunately make it any further. And it was a little bit sausagey. It was also mixed with something that ACEEE was trying to do. And so it was a little bit interesting. It wasn't quite the pure idea that I had suggested, but I thought it was still pretty good. The Cooler Act it hasn't been introduced yet, but it's done. It was done through Senator Martin Heinrich's office. And this was exactly what I suggested, although rather than going to the manufacturers, it was going to the distributors. Because Dan, you asked about pushback. The biggest issue with the Heater Act was it was giving money straight to the OEMs, and the OEMs were afraid of the optics of that, looking like it was just giving them money. And to be fair, when I came up with the idea, I was like, well, this is going to look like a big corporate handout. But it is by far the cheapest way to do it, because if you do that, so it's $150 in parts, which means you can do it for 400-ish, maybe 500-ish at either the manufacturer level or the distributor level. So HVAC contractors buy the equipment that they install from distributors. So every city has at least a couple, and that's where they get their units from. So the manufacturers were worried about it looking like a handout. So the Cooler Act is actually aimed at the distributors. And but it's exactly what I suggested. It's just direct payments for doing that. And one of the reasons this is important is the vast majority of home HVAC replacements are emergencies, about 85%. So most people, I mean, it's a sucky thing to spend money on. It's like a roof. I've always hated buying roofs, So I can go to Europe for 2 months, or I can put a roof on my house and it looks exactly the same. I would much rather go to Europe, take a long vacation. Buying HVAC is not sexy. People don't generally want to do it. So people tend to wait until either the furnace breaks on a cold day or the air conditioner breaks on a hot day, and then it's an emergency. And so you want to have only heat pumps on shelves because only what is on the shelf at that moment actually gets installed. And so that's what we're trying to do with this whole idea, because the vast majority of systems are replaced under duress.
Hey, what's the status with the Cooler Act? Is that going to be like put on the floor at any time?
No, so actually, thank you for the follow-up. So the challenge is it really could use a Republican co-sponsor. And all of the Republican senators that we've reached out to said that the IRA really took any political will out of the room for something related to heat pumps. So unfortunately, and I actually, I, I hate the IRA programs for the heat pumps. There's lots of parts of the IRA that I like, the Inflation Reduction Act, but the parts that affect me make selling the units harder. They're likely to hurt the poor, and the programs that are actually useful really only benefit the wealthy. Um, and it also has very limited impact. So it's not good policy, and it's incredibly frustrating to see something like that go through. Um, Home electrification is going to be a hard lift. As it stands, I can't see any path to finishing home decarb by the time I die, which is probably around 2060. I'd be 82 at that point. Uh, and it was a bummer to watch that daylight close. It honestly has depressed me for a while. I've been depressed and angry the last couple of years. Um, but it doesn't mean that there isn't any possibility in the future. But the easiest chance would have been to put this idea into the IRA, and we would have already been running 100% heat pumps for 12 to 18 months. So it would have been done. Like it's not a guarantee for 2050 home decarb, but let's say it's 10% odds. And as it stands right now, it's like 1 in 1 billion. So I hate to be a downer on that, but we've got a really, really hard lift at the moment. But this one idea is enough to uh, literally increase the odds about 100 million times in my estimation. So this is an important thing to do. So hopefully in time, cooler will pop out. So Senator Heinrich likes the idea. It's just that it really needs a conservative co-sponsor, and obviously the political climate has just changed substantially since November. Um, so we'll see what happens. I am curious though, because Elon's there. Um, and I mean, we can have a lot of discussions over Elon and his political moves and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is, we have a significant electrification advocate as a key advisor to the president. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens there. Okay, looking a little bit more at the Hybrid Heat Homes paper, what we found was it was going to save about 27 billion in energy over 10 years. This is nationwide, and like it's kind of scattered. I'll show you in a little bit. So if you run an expensive heating fuel, so ballpark electric resistance costs about triple what natural gas and heat pumps do. Fuel oil costs between 3 and 4 times what running either natural gas or heat pumps do. Propane is generally 2 to 3 times the cost for heating your house versus either natural gas or heat pumps. And natural gas and heat pumps, they're not dead on, but like I said, it's plus or minus 20 or 30%, which when you're talking about, $1,000 per year heating costs, which is, kind of a reasonable average for the country, or at least for the natural gas areas, you're only talking about a couple $100 a year difference. And I'll show you that in a minute. So anyway, 27 billion in savings, and this has moved around. It looked better for a couple of years, and now it looks worse because again, the heating fuel costs are moving around. But then also the 80 billion in additional benefits. This is an air quality thing for the most part. So when we burn much, much less stuff, we put much fewer pollutants into the air, and those pollutants have significant health detriments. So this was basically 80 billion in projected reduced healthcare costs because of burning less stuff. So if you add these two up, it's upwards of 100 billion in potential benefits for a program that costs 10. So depends how you run the numbers, but somewhere between the program will pay for itself in theory somewhere between 7 and 10 times over. So I run fiscally conservative. This to me is a very good fiscally conservative idea. I don't want to spend money that's just dumb if we can avoid it. And this is what the averages were. So in 2032, which would have been 10 years out from when the program started, it would have knocked out 49 million tons of carbon dioxide. It reduced the average energy bill by 170 bucks. And this, I think, was actually a little bit rich. In fact, the first numbers came back kind of heavy, and I'm like, those are not defensible. Don't put those out there. I'm going to get killed. And then you can see there's cleaner air. There's a bunch of different things. So many fewer premature deaths, many fewer emergency room visits, many fewer heart attacks, things like that. So lots of health benefits. And then if you take a look at this paper, at the end of it, it shows state level savings. So I just screenshotted the top 10 states or so. It's just alphabetical. But it shows you like what the total savings are of having a hybrid system in a house are. So you can see there's 643 bucks for Alabama. Now, California, at the time, the fuel cost difference was significant. So it shows $3,000. This has largely flipped at this point. Oftentimes heat pumps are more expensive to run than furnaces in California. And then another key thing to note is I was just talking about cheap heating fuels being natural gas and then electricity for heat pumps. So if you're looking at gas homes, the operating cost difference per year is anywhere from slightly more expensive, $8 a year more expensive, to $100 a year less expensive, somewhere in that range. If you're heating with electric heat or basically the expensive heating fuels, this is where there's a lot of difference. And this actually is the equity side of things that I really like. We actually live in an old coal camp here. So there are 4 coal mines within 3 miles of my house. Totally hilarious that we ended up moving to coal country in West Virginia, but that's what we did. And despite the fact that my neighbors are pretty poor, about half of the houses do have central air. So if we give them a central heat pump, we can easily save them a significant amount of money per year, $500 to $1,000 per year. And this is real money, where this is about the same. So that's where I put at the bottom here. Operating costs for hybrids are about equal. So plus or minus 50 bucks, 100 bucks a year, something like that. Unless it's dealing with an expensive heating fuel. Dan, how are we doing on time here? I'm going to use about 50 minutes, aren't I?
Yeah, 1:45 right now, and class ends at 1:50.
Okay. Well, it's just 2 last slides here, basically, and then hopefully we can take a question or two. So this is a program. I won't dive into all of the details here. Dan can share these slides with y'all. But I put in a house with a 3-ton heat load, which is 36,000 BTUs, and a 2-ton cooling load. This is representative of a whole heck of a lot of houses. I actually put my in-laws zip code in here. So this is in the Cleveland area. And a key thing to note is down here, annual savings. So this is just a standard furnace and air conditioner, like what I would normally see right now, a 13 SEER AC and an 85% efficient furnace. And then I compared it to a hybrid, a pretty nice heat pump, straight heat pump system, and a very nice straight heat pump system. And the hybrid with kind of nationwide average fuel costs of $1.30 a therm and 15 cents per kilowatt hour. The hybrid actually saves a decent chunk of change in this exact instance, where the heat pumps are basically roughly equal, saving $30 or $8 a year, so almost nothing. So this is where I say it varies. You need to know what is the heat load, what's the cooling load, where is it, and then what are your fuel prices, and then what systems are you using? So there's a whole lot of variables that you need to know the answers to actually project what will happen. I found this tool is pretty close to reality, though. It's within 10 or 15% of reality, if I give it accurate numbers. Now, Dan, you asked me to input 279 a therm and 26.4 cents per kilowatt hour. And so this is all the exact same stuff up here. Although it's funny, actually, I realized I should have put your zip code in, but pretty similar climate in Cleveland versus where you all are. So the numbers will be close. I can always rerun it. But there are significant savings in this case from moving from natural gas to a heat pump in your market. So $1,000 and then almost 500 and almost 450. Last little point, if you all are renting, which is what you're coming up for, so you're coming into the 20s, you get to have fun, but you're going to be broke. That's just the life stage. Try and put some money away in retirement. It will go a heck of a lot further. But if you're renting and you want to move to using electric heat, you can get a window heat pump, something like this. Although, man, the reviews on this particular model were a little scary. But there's a bunch of stuff that's coming on the market. There's Gradient, which is out there, but it's quite expensive. It's $4,000 or $5,000. That's more than I would spend for that. This is about an $800 product, and I'm hoping that we'll see more products in that range. And then another thing, just to throw out there, a friend of mine, Drew Tozer, said selling HVAC is actually one of the most impactful climate jobs you can have. And I had never looked at it that way. It was pretty interesting. So selling HVAC, it's actually a pretty good paying job. It's not hard to make 100, 200,000 a year. Or you can start to join an HVAC company. And this is my buddy Stephen Reardon, the guy in North Carolina with the hybrid system that has never run the furnace. That's Stephen. So super good guy, super curious. I've ended up with a bunch of great friends in the HVAC industry, which is funny because I'm more of a white collar egghead, but I've got a ton of blue collar friends and I do plenty of blue collar work myself. So that's where I am. Any other questions? Did I miss anything in here, Dan?
No, that was great. Thanks so much for joining us virtually. I will share with the students the slides and also where they can find you on YouTube and other places. Yeah, so thanks so much for joining us. And yeah, I'll see you later.
Will do. Have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you afterwards. Thanks all.
All right, thanks everyone. I'll be right here, and otherwise I'll see you all on Friday.